Well, guys, I've already introduced our guest speaker today, but let me tell you just a little bit about him before he gets up here. Nate Larkin is the author of the book Samson and the Pirate Monks. You go, what? When I first heard that title, I said, what in the world is that all about? So I got the book and I read it and I couldn't put it down. This literally is one of the best books I have ever read. You will not be able to put it down. And he's going to tell his story. And it's available, by the way. He's got a few on the back table there. They're $65 a piece and $10, or if you can't afford it, we'll pick it up for you. But you are going to love hearing Nate Larkin. You don't know his story yet, but why don't you welcome Nate? Come on up here.
Hey guys, it's great to be here with you. Allie and I spent 16 years in South Florida. We moved to Tennessee in 1998, spring of 98. It took me 6 months to run out of money. So in the fall of 98, I took a job selling burial plots and prepaid funeral expenses at a Nashville cemetery. And it was there on a Monday morning that I heard the strangest motivational speech I have ever heard. Our sales manager was a former preacher from East Tennessee who drove a Cadillac. And he looked around at the table. There were 6 of us on the sales team. And he said, every one of you moved here from someplace else. And I know why you came. You came to Nashville for the same reason everybody comes to Nashville. You came hoping to get famous. He said, well, there's lots of famous people around here. Red Foley's buried here. You probably don't know who he is, but there was a time when he owned this town. Tammy Wynette's in the mausoleum. You know who's up on the hill right there? Marty Robbins. In his day, Marty Robbins was bigger than Elvis. His death was international news. Do you know who visits Marty's grave now? Nobody. And unless you're Elvis, and none of you are Elvis, nobody is going to visit your grave either. Once your kids are gone, you will be forgotten, just like everybody else. So let's forget about getting famous today and go out there and sell some funerals. I didn't go straight home from work that day. Allie was not in any mood to see me. She was still coming to grips with the fact that the man she thought she married was not the man she'd married. I went instead to a 12-step group for sex addicts, a place I never expected to go. It had been a few weeks earlier that Allie had caught me looking at porn, took her completely by surprise. She didn't know that my porn use had started when I was 10 years old, shortly after my mother died. I wrestled with a lot of guilt and shame, went through binge and purge cycles all through adolescence. And I knew that when I met the perfect woman and got married, the porn would disappear. And I did meet a great woman. What I didn't realize was that by that point, porn and masturbation had become my primary stress management strategy. Whenever I was in distress, that's where I went. And as it turns out, marriage is stressful. And so it wasn't too long after the honeymoon that the problem reappeared. Well, I battled with it some more. And the worst thing was I'm a church guy. I was training for the ministry. I was on my way to seminary. What I told myself then was, you know what? Porn is probably my best defense against infidelity. I love my wife. I meant it when I said I'll be faithful to her so long as we both shall live. And these aren't real people. And I'm probably doing my wife a favor by not burdening her with all my sexual needs. I'm being pretty noble here. What I didn't realize was that porn was now grooming me. It got a lot worse when on a seminary-sponsored trip into New York City, calculated to show us how women are exploited by the sex business, I saw hardcore porn for the first time. The stuff any unsupervised 8-year-old can find in 3 minutes today on the internet, I saw for the first time as a married man, with my wife sitting beside me in the peep show booth. She came on the tour. She put the quarter in. Allie was disgusted by what she saw, and I was too in that moment. But at the same time, it was as though somewhere deep inside me a door swung open. And it wasn't too long after that I started slipping away from home and from seminary and wandering into Trenton, New Jersey in search of a source for my new drug, because, baby, I had found my drug. I'd never been a drinker, never been a drugger, but I had found my drug. It took a few years. It was several years later. I've planted a church in South Florida. I've got 3 kids. And then one awful day, I didn't realize, it was like sitting in a simulator every day. I was being programmed. It happened on a Christmas Eve. I was on my way to lead a candlelight service in Fort Lauderdale. I pulled over to offer a woman a ride out of the rain, not knowing what she was doing until she was in the car and propositioning me. And then I just went on autopilot. Didn't even see really the person in the car. Never occurred to me even to wonder why a young woman would be on the street on Christmas Eve offering herself to strangers. That was an awful night. I told myself I was never going to do that again. I begged God I wouldn't do it again. Promised him I wouldn't do it again. And I didn't right away, but then I did. And I did it again and again and again. I was very, very careful. I was never caught, but just the stress, the self-hate, I despised my own hypocrisy. So about a year later, it was on my 30th birthday, I woke up knowing that I had to either quit the behavior or quit the ministry. And at that point, there was only one I could quit. So I retired from the ministry at the age of 30, begging burnout. Went into business, where I had the great misfortune to succeed. So now I've got money, which I never had as a pastor, and even less accountability. And what followed was a very dark dozen years. We made the move to Tennessee. And it was amazing. We got there, Allie and I are buying furniture and hanging curtains and walking to church holding hands. And the obsession disappeared. And I thought, wow, all that time the problem was Florida. Until we started running out of money. And that's when I started to get scared. And that's when I reached for the only fear medication I'd ever used. So late one night, after Allie had fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed, went back to my office, fired up the computer, started downloading porn. Because now, the world had changed. In the beginning, porn was something I had to go looking for, and I took a risk every time I did. But now, porn comes looking for you. And there it was, free of charge, in the privacy, anonymity of my own home or office or automobile. An endless variety of virtual sex partners. I don't know how long I was there. Time disappeared, as it always does when we're in a disassociated state. All I know is that I looked up and my wife was standing there. I hadn't even heard her come in. She had this look of shocked incomprehension on her face. She didn't say anything. She went back into the bedroom. I shut everything down and followed her, apologizing, explaining, promising, begging. It was a very long night, but in the end, she forgave me. A few nights later, though, she found a condom on the floor in the bathroom that I couldn't quite explain. And this time she didn't cry. She sat me down on the edge of our bed, and she said the words that saved my life. She said, "I'm done." She said, "I still love you, but I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't respect you. And I don't think you can ever change." Those were the words that gave me the gift of desperation. Made me willing for the first time to do something I'd never done before, which is go for help. Now, I didn't go to church for help. For one thing, it was a new church, and we were trying to find our place, and I didn't want to blow it before we got there. Plus, I'd grown up in church. I'd been around. I had seen how the church typically responds when a guy takes our rhetoric about grace at face value and actually confesses or admits after he's been caught some kind of a sexual sin. I've seen what happens. The sirens go off. There's a sinner in the church. Prayer chain is notified. The news travels quickly. Oh, he might be able to stay. We'll assign him a probation officer, an accountability partner. There's a theoretical route toward restoration, but everybody knows that if he's ever going to come back to respectability, it's going to have to be someplace else. And I was certain that is what would happen to me. So I went to the basement of another church in the middle of the week while all the good people were gone, and I sat in a circle with a bunch of mess-up guys. And I met Jesus. I remember coming out of that room mad, furious, that I had spent a lifetime in church, and I had never been in a room that safe. I'd never heard honesty like that in my life. Never that level of transparency. Never felt that much kindness, that much empathy. Love. I'd never heard Jesus like I heard him in that room from a bunch of Samaritans who didn't even seem to know his proper name. They kept referring to him as a higher power. And when the meeting was over, one of the guys, a guy who I happened to recognize from church, said, "If you want, I'll walk with you a while." And he meant it literally. For the next year or so, he and I went for a walk every week, and he wanted me to call him every day. And man, I'm so grateful for that 12-step experience. I met God, and it didn't just save my marriage. It didn't just save my life. It saved me spiritually. It was actually good for me for a while to be deprived of my Christian vocabulary and the pat answers that weren't working. And God got a lot bigger than he'd ever been before and a lot closer. But also, the Bible changed on me. I started seeing doors and windows on the gospel that I'd never noticed. And so a few years later, I went to my pastor, told him what I was doing, told him how God was working in my life, told him my story. Gave him my phone number, said, "Hey, if there's anybody else you think I can help," my phone started to ring. So before I know it, I'm walking with a dozen guys, and in 2004, we started a group called the Samson Society. Not a group for sex addicts and porn addicts, because that wasn't everybody's presenting issue. I have come to believe that all addicts share an inner architecture. What one helps one will help another, right? All of us have something in our life that's bigger than we are. And most of us have been suckered into playing an endless game of one-on-one against a superior opponent, a guy who's only lost that game once in an epic 40-day battle in the desert. But the gates of hell cannot prevail against the church. When we give up our private, begging God for a private solution to our private problem, believing somehow that our personal relationship with Jesus is a private one, when he never offered a private one to anybody. He first said, "Follow me," to 2 guys, not just 1, and quickly added 10 more to them. Jesus came to reconcile us to God and to each other. He came to reconstitute the family of God. I am a colossal failure as a solo disciple for a simple reason. Jesus doesn't have any solo disciples. He says that I am a member not of an organization, but of an organism who's living. It's a living, breathing thing whose members are so closely connected we can only move together. So I was walking with this guy. I do it to this day, by the way. Every day I take at least a 1 hour walk with at least one guy. I've got a Monday guy, a Tuesday guy, a Wednesday guy, a Thursday guy, a Friday guy. Some days I have 2 guys. And if we're not in the same space, let's say I'm in Florida and they're in Tennessee or someplace else, we can still walk. I learned that in COVID. We can be on the phone and walk. Not all that long ago, I was walking in Pittsburgh, downtown, just hustling along, talking to my guy, and I tripped right there on a public sidewalk. And I started running to try to catch up with myself, and that didn't work, and I landed hard. And you know what I felt when I landed? It wasn't the pain. I felt embarrassed as hell, just ashamed. I wonder how many people saw that. And I scrambled to my feet as quickly as I could and, tried not to limp and fake like I'd meant to do it, I remember my first relapse walking with my first sponsor. I would rehearse my daily phone call to him. And, because my plan, I was going to be the star pupil. I'm going to set the land speed record for recovery. There's no way in the world I'm going to join this bunch of losers. I'm there for research purposes. I'm a smart guy. I've been searching for years for the final piece of the puzzle, the key insight, the magic routine, whatever it is that will enable me finally to overcome this compulsion on my own. I'm hopeful that I've finally found the people who have the secret information. So I'm just going to master the material quickly, graduate, get the diploma, the green jacket, the trophy, whatever it is they give you, and go on and forget that this sad chapter of my life has ever happened, and nobody else will need to know. Turns out there isn't any secret information. There's lots of wisdom. It's thousands of years old. And I didn't have an information problem. What I had was a relationship problem. I was well known, but nobody knew me. And truth is, I didn't even know myself. So anyway, I had this slip. It just seemed to happen out of nowhere. Boom, face first back into the internet. I didn't call my sponsor right away. I waited 3 days. I wanted to get 3 days clean before I told him. But finally, I made the call, and then casually at the end of the call, I said, by the way, I had a slip last Tuesday, but I'm fine. I learned from it. It's good. It won't happen again. And then I braced for the punch. And it never came. I said, dude, I'm sorry. That must have sucked. Let's get together and talk about it. He taught me to start thinking of a slip, not as failure, but as feedback. It's an indication that whatever I was doing was not right or not enough. So what adjustments do we need to make? It was a shame-free response. I remember being haunted during those years by that verse from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1, where Paul, as a prisoner of the Lord, says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. And when you keep falling down, I was trying to overcome this thing, and so I'm going to these meetings, and I'm trying to follow directions, but I could get 30 days, and then boom, I'd have a slip, and I'd pull myself together. It was as though sobriety had a half-life. Then it'd be 2 weeks, and then be a week, and then I'd spiral into some kind of a frenzy until I was so disgusted that I'd start over. I was operating somehow on the assumption that if I could just hate my sin and hate myself enough, I could stop. I wasn't leaning into grace. I wasn't leaning into the love of God. And I was drowning in shame. Obsessed with my guilt, but drowning in shame. Shame, as I'm sure you know, was man's first response to sin, right? That story in the Bible, the way the narrative goes in Genesis, that Adam and Eve had this fantastic, uninhibited relationship with God and with each other. The Bible goes to great pains to say they were naked and they were not ashamed. Adam and Eve had nothing to hide from each other, and every day they went for a walk with God, naked as jaybirds, just chipping through the garden. Until the day they broke the commandment. And their first response was shame. Actually, I think it's more precise to say their first response was fear. Shame is a function of fear. Shame is afraid that if you see how bad I screwed up, you will reject me. If you see how bad I am, you'll reject me. And so right away, Adam and Eve are hiding from each other, making pathetic clothes, just trying to, don't look. And when God comes for his walk in the garden, which in the churches where I was raised, he never would have done. I was taught that God can't be around sin. He's so holy, he can't be. Apparently, sin is kryptonite to God. So if you sin, you have to repent and turn around and come back, and then God can be with you. Apparently, God doesn't subscribe to that theology because he showed up right on time, knowing full well what had happened, because he loves us. But shame, that's the response. Did you know that in the Bible, shame is a far bigger issue than guilt? For every one mention of guilt in the Bible, there are 3 of shame. At Easter, we tend to focus on our guilt and the fact that Jesus, in that painful, bloody death, shed his blood as payment for our guilt. And his righteousness has become our righteousness, and our guilt no longer exists. It's a beautiful truth, but it's only part of the story. You see, Jesus didn't just choose the most painful, bloody death available because he was dying for our guilt. He also chose the most shameful death available in that culture. To be stripped naked, beaten, paraded through the city naked, taken to a hill outside the city, hoisted high in the air, spread eagle, naked, facing the city. He not only chose the most painful death available, dying for our guilt, he chose the most shameful death available because he was dying for our shame. And the message of the gospel is you don't have to hide anymore. Too often in our accountability setups, we essentially are trying to shame each other out of shame-based behavior. The operating assumption is that if I have to confess to you that I've failed, the fear of having to confess it will be enough to keep me from doing it. That never worked for me. I was always lying by the second meeting. Shame's a strong thing. To me, recovery, which is kind of the modern cultural word for sanctification, it's a progressive thing, and it really has a lot to do with learning how to walk or learning how to walk again. Those of us who consider ourselves addicts, that thing that we got addicted to saved our life at one point. When we were about to lose our balance, when something had happened in our life that was bigger than we could handle, it might have been a huge event, or it might have just been the absence of any kind of notice and nurture. We found something that we could hang on to that would help us to maintain our emotional balance. And we learned to walk with that thing. That was our crutch that kept us from toppling. Whenever we started to fall, we'd grab that. You know, it took you a long time to learn how to walk for the very first time. You came into this world, I mean, you didn't even know you had arms and legs. It took a while to figure that out. You didn't know how to operate them. It took a couple of weeks before you stopped hitting yourself in the face. But eventually, you were learning at a ferocious rate during those first couple of years. And you were learning how to operate these limbs. One amazing day, you actually rolled over. Kind of panicked your parents a little bit. Now they knew they couldn't leave you unattended on a bed. And a little while later, you got up on hands and knees. You learned to creep. You learned to crawl. One day, you pulled yourself up on something. And then one amazing day, you stood up, hanging onto something, and you let go. And then you fell down. Because you'd never stood up before. Which is why God gives babies short legs, flexible bones, and soft bottoms. We're going to fall down a lot while we're learning to walk. We're learning to balance. As I'm sure you know, the primary organ, sensory organ for balance is in the inner ear. This nautilus-shaped thing filled with a viscous fluid has some very tiny filaments that go into it that are wired directly to the brain. And they register any movement. It helps our brain keep track of where we are in space. Now, that sensory system doesn't just monitor where we are, it also records where we are in a database, essentially. And here's the crazy thing. The brain is not just monitoring where we are now, it is also thinking ahead, trying to anticipate what the next step will be so that it can compensate and have us move in a way that'll prevent us from falling over. Your brain is always thinking a step ahead. The problem is, when we first get up on our feet for the first time, the database is empty. That algorithm that the brain is always running relies on data. And until it has enough data, it is not accurate. You have to fall down a lot until there's enough information in the database for your brain to keep you upright consistently. And once you learn to stand and you learn to walk, then you can learn to run. You can learn to skip. Remember learning to skip? That was a huge accomplishment. Now, if you're trying to do it with a crutch, you can still walk. Can't run. Can't dance. But you can walk. You can function. All of that learning, by the way, learning what that is what's called implicit learning. Those memories now are distributed throughout your body. We used to think that memories are just in the brain. We now know that memory is distributed throughout the body. Muscle memory is a real thing. And actually, the nervous system extends into the gut. There is serotonin, the hormone, the feel-good chemical that makes us feel good. It's actually manufactured in the gut. There's a virtual superhighway of sensory communication between the gut and the brain. Gut sense is a real thing. But all of this is implicit, subconscious learning. On around 2 years old, we develop another learning system, a separate learning system. It's called explicit learning. This is the kind of learning that relies on words. With explicit learning, we can learn facts. We can We can learn language. We can learn that George Washington was the first president of the United States. We can learn the Bible. Explicit learning is a great thing. We can become Presbyterians if we have explicit learning. Now, here's the thing about these two learning systems. They can cooperate. They're completely separate. They can cooperate, but they can also inhibit each other. Do you know it is possible to overthink something? I remember my first sponsor saying, Nate, you can't be too dumb to get this, but you can be too smart. He said, you're trying to think your way to right acting. I want to show you how to act your way to right thinking. This is what he was getting at, implicit learning. You probably don't remember learning how to walk, but I'll bet you remember learning how to ride a bike. I remember I got my first bike. I must have been 5 years old. My dad didn't teach me how to ride a bike, but he did bring a bike home, little 12-inch wheels. It had training wheels on it. And he said, ride that thing, you know. And so I went, while he was at work, I went up and down the driveway for quite a few weeks in that thing. And then one day he came home and said, all right, time to take the training wheels off. He took them off. I thought I would ride away, but, you know, I crashed. As far as I know, everybody, you know, crashes in the beginning. Because here's the thing about a bike. By the time you get a bike, you've learned balance. You've learned how to stay upright. Your brain knows how to do this. But for the very first time, there is now a hinge between you and the ground that wasn't there before. So your instincts are wrong. It's like trying to back up a trailer for the first time. You're turning in the wrong direction. And that's really where I was in early recovery. I was trying to think my way to right acting. That wasn't working. And my instincts were wrong. Those implicit decisions I was making, sometimes I would wind up being someplace I knew I didn't want to go, and I couldn't remember deciding to go there. That's because the decision was made before I was conscious of it. I want to tell you, sanctification begins with repentance. It is very much a healing process, and it's also a learning process. And it takes time. And we have an endlessly patient God. He's far more patient with me than I am with myself. I'm grateful to understand today that relapse is part of recovery. So grace is so essential. I'm never going to recover my own righteousness. And even if I become really proficient at, let's say, riding the bike, even a professional bike rider can crash. I remember when I was 12 years old, I really wanted a bike. We were poor. I'm the oldest of 10 kids. We didn't have money. My friends had these, this is in the 60s. My friends had these really cool bikes. 20-inch wheels, chrome wheels, high-rise handlebars, banana seats. They could pull wheelies. They could do all kinds of tricks. It was just the coolest thing in the world. And I wanted a bike. And my dad told me that if I got a paper route, he would lend me the money to buy a bike, and I could pay him back from the paper route. And I got a paper route. And my dad went and bought the bike. He came home with it. Turns out my dad bought the kind of bike he would have liked when he was 12 years old. This massive Buick of a bike. It had a center console. It had a siren and a bell and fenders. And he equipped it with 2 wire baskets mounted slightly behind the rear wheel where I could put the papers. Well, I started modifying the bike. I took off the center console. I got a banana seat from a buddy, but I couldn't make it fit with the baskets. I did, however, get high-rise handlebars. I took the fenders off. Now, the big paper day was Friday. That's when we got the supplements for all the supermarkets. Made the paper that was the thickest, heaviest paper. We'd have to put the papers together, load up the baskets. So it's Friday afternoon. I've got a full load on. I head off. And the first leg of my route goes down a big hill. And about halfway down the hill, there's a bit of a bump where they'd done a repair. Well, I get sailing down that hill, hit the bump, pumped the pedals a little bit, pulled up on the handlebars, and I didn't just pop a wheelie. The bike came up and up and up, and then it stabilized. And I am riding down the middle of the street on one wheel. And it was amazing. I took my hands away. I folded my hands, folded my arms, and I'm looking around thinking, somebody has to see this. Who is seeing this? And then I looked, and I saw something bouncing down the street ahead of me. I hadn't tightened the nuts on the front wheel after taking the fender off. I landed on those front forks, sparks everywhere, sliding down the street, elbows, chin, papers everywhere. And what did I feel? Shame. Shame. I scrambled to my feet as quickly as I could, hoping nobody had seen, scrambling, trying to collect all the papers, put it back together. Please don't let anybody see. Shame. You know, I still think back from time to time about that motivational speech. And I think the reason I remember it is because I know he was right. I did come to Nashville hoping to get famous. I wasn't saying anything, but I had a couple songs in my pocket I was hoping to play for somebody. When Samson and the Pirate Monks came out, it's embarrassing to say, but I started Googling myself to see whether I was going to get some attention finally on the internet. I remember the first day I looked and Nate Larkin came up 12 times on Google. Then I looked closer and I saw that I'm not the only Nate Larkin. Half of them were for some very athletic, young, good-looking filmmaker guy named Nate Larkin. I still worry about him a little bit as I've gotten more visibility. I can't help but wonder whether I've thrown a wrench into his dating life. And I even briefly wondered whether there was going to be any confusion in heaven. I do know, I was told that when I went forward and accepted Jesus as my Savior, my name was written in the Lamb's Book of Life. But here's what I know today. Nate Larkin is not in the Lamb's Book of Life. Because that's not my real name. That's the name my parents gave me. The same parents that taught me what the world is like, where my place is in it, what's valuable about me and what isn't, what can be shown, what needs to be hidden, what will get applause, what won't. They gave me that name. But I have another name. A name that was given to me before the foundation of the world, written on his hand. I don't know it, but I'll recognize it when I hear it. That name was given to me by my Heavenly Father, who has seen everything I've ever done and has never looked away, never blinks. His love for me is unconditional. And really, my only charge today is to accept that love and reflect it to others. And that's really what I try to do today. I'm here, by the way, I have a freedom today. I have a wonderful freedom. How much time have I got? Oh, I got another 15 minutes. Let me take the story a little bit further. If you read Samson the Pirate Monk, you'll find out that there are three things I love. I love Allie, I love baseball, and I love beer. I grew up in a Pentecostal home. When the book was about to come out, I sent the galley to my dad. He didn't know my story, and I wanted to give him warning. And my dad's a Pentecostal preacher. He's with Jesus now. But Dad made it through the porn and he made it through the hookers, but when he got to the beer, he was done. Ironically, beer helped to save my marriage in those first couple of years, awkward years, when Allie was coming into terms with betrayal trauma and what it means to forgive and what it means to feel and all that stuff. I was sleeping in a closet. We'd have good days and bad days, but we could go to the pub and we could play cards, another cardinal sin. And I have a couple Guinnesses. We would have what we called the second beer love waves. We could talk and then we'd go home and we could make it to the next day. And I've had a lot of great conversations in pubs with guys. The original Samson meeting there's the meeting from 7 to 8 at Christ Community Church, and then the meeting after the meeting at McCreary's Irish Pub, where we talk and laugh and argue and insult each other and, have follow-up conversations. Wonderful. So I do like beer. But starting a few years ago, began to dawn on me that alcohol was not so much that I was taking the drink as that the drink was taking me. It's like this alarm went off at around 5 o'clock that it was time to have a beer. The first beer of the evening. The Apostle Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by any. And I found that I was free to drink, but I didn't seem to be very free to stop. So, of course, being this expert on recovery, I activated my explicit learning system and I started buying books on how to quit drinking. And there's some good books. And I quit several times. Remember one time Allie and I, we did dry January. So the 28th of January, we're at a restaurant. The waiter comes by and says, what do you have? And I looked at Allie and I said, you know what? We agreed to quit for a month. And 28 days is a lunar month. She was so glad I came up with that rationalization. But then, about a year and a half ago, a terrible thing happened. Allie quit drinking. She's my best drinking buddy and my primary rationalization for drinking. I drank for the sake of my marriage, and she quit. Now, I was talking to my guys about this, but do you know it's possible to be semi-transparent? I was downplaying, really to myself and then to them. I was kind of undercounting what I was drinking. I wasn't telling the whole story. It was starting to get crazy, especially after Allie quit. I started hiding it. So now I'm hiding alcohol. I'm leaving the house to go drink, but I'm not going to drink at home. There are 3 convenience stores in our little town that we moved to, and I wouldn't go to the same one twice in one day. I'd rotate. It's crazy. And it was eating me up. I knew it wasn't good for me. From reading the books, I knew it wasn't good for me. Not at that level, not as much as I was drinking. But I was back, and you know what it was? It was shame. Frickin' shame. I didn't want to tell my tribe of Samson guys that I was back in the shit with something else. But April of last year, I went to speak down in Mississippi, spoke for a big men's event. Took a drink, I took a drink before I went in, did the Nate Larkin show. But that weekend, I was invited to a retreat in the middle of the woods, a bunch of guys, that I wasn't leading. I just got to be one of the new guys. There were 12 new guys and 30 guys who'd done it before. We sat around a fire and told our stories. Some of those other guys had never told anything, their story. I'd been a professional storyteller, but there was a big part of the story I'd never told. And it was killing me. And that night, I just dumped the truck. Just pushed back on shame and told the whole ugly thing. That was April 17th. I haven't had a drink since. Haven't needed to. Felt the desire to a few times, but haven't needed to. Confess your sins one to another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. Here's the thing. If you're battling something that you can't stop, my bet is that what's holding you is shame. And you cannot think your way out of shame. You cannot believe your way out of shame. You can only walk yourself out of shame. When we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all unrighteousness. So if you want to get free, find a guy or find a place that's safe enough for you to tell the thing without having to speak in code, without having to pretty it up, without having to explain it. Trust entirely on the love and the grace of God and allow him to love you in your brokenness. That's the only path to freedom I know. I've found it, I've lost it, I've found it again. And my prayer for you today is that if you're caught in anything, and brothers, we can get caught in even respectable addictions. Make no mistake about it, the workaholic will destroy himself and his family every bit as efficiently as the alcoholic will. The difference is we'll pat him on the back while he's committing suicide, put him on the board. Whatever it is, find a place. And my bet is that there are men in this room who are safe enough for you to do it with. And if you want to give another guy a gift, don't give him your strength. Don't give him your answers. Give him your weakness. You'll become the safest guy he knows. Set the bar low and let Jesus be the hero. Thanks, guys.